The sound of gunshots in the distance barely registered over the clamor of the crowded saloon, but Genevieve Vale noticed. New to Sloan, Wyoming territory, she had quickly learned to distinguish between celebratory shots and those fired in anger. These were neither. These were business. Another poor soul had likely lost everything in a desperate game of chance, and now someone was settling accounts the frontier way. Genevieve kept her head down and continued wiping glasses behind the bar, her auburn hair tucked neatly under a simple cap, her green eyes focused on her work. It was 1876, and the West was still wild despite the march of civilization. The town of Sloan had sprung up like many others, first as a way station for prospectors heading to the mountains, then as a trading post, and finally as a proper town with a general store, a church, 3 saloons, and a hotel. The Silver Spur, where Genevieve worked, was the most respectable of the drinking establishments, which wasn't saying much. "Another whiskey, Miss Jenny," slurred an older miner whose name she could never remember. His beard was stained yellow from tobacco, and his eyes were red-rimmed from drink and dust. Genevieve nodded and poured the drink, careful not to spill a drop. Whiskey cost money, and Mr. Rankin, the owner of the Silver Spur, counted every penny. "That'll be 2 bits," she said, sliding the glass across the polished wood. The miner fumbled in his pockets and produced a coin, dropping it on the counter with an unsteady hand. "You're a right fine lady, Miss Jenny," he mumbled. "Too fine for a place like this." She gave him a practiced smile. "Thank you kindly, sir." At 22, Genevieve had already seen enough of life's cruelties to last several lifetimes. Orphaned at 16 when influenza took her parents within days of each other back in Missouri, she had made her way west, following her older brother Thomas to Colorado. When Thomas was killed in a mining accident 2 years ago, she had been left alone again, with nothing but her wits and her willingness to work. Sloan was supposed to be a fresh start. Mr. Rankin had been looking for a barmaid who could also keep books, and Genevieve's education, unusual for a young woman in these parts, had secured her the position. 6 months in, she was still learning the rhythms of the town and keeping to herself, saving what little money she could. The saloon doors swung open, and a tall figure blocked the late afternoon sunlight. Clayton Xanders removed his hat as he stepped inside, revealing sandy blonde hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. His blue eyes scanned the room with the careful assessment of a man accustomed to trouble before it happened. Genevieve had seen him around town since her arrival. He wasn't exactly a lawman, but people respected him. He ran a small ranch outside of town and occasionally worked as a guide for parties heading west. He was young for a rancher, perhaps 26 or 27, but carried himself with the confidence of someone much older. "Miss Vale," he nodded at her as he approached the bar. "A coffee if you've got it." "Just brewed a fresh pot, Mr. Xanders," she replied, turning to fetch it. When she returned with the steaming cup, he was leaning against the bar, his back to the room but positioned so he could see the door in the mirror behind her. "Any trouble lately?" He asked quietly, warming his hands on the mug. She hesitated, wondering why he was asking her. "Nothing unusual. Why do you ask?" Clayton took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Just keeping an ear to the ground. There's been talk about some men passing through, men who deal in certain commodities." The way he said the last word made her uncomfortable. "I don't follow much gossip, Mr. Xanders." He studied her for a moment. "That's probably wise. But if you notice anything strange, any men showing particular interest in any of the girls who work here or in town, I'd appreciate knowing about it." Before she could respond, the doors swung open again, admitting 3 men she'd never seen before. They were trail-worn but well-armed, with an air of dangerous purpose about them. "Speaking of strangers," Clayton murmured, turning slightly to observe the newcomers. The men made their way to a table in the corner, and Genevieve moved to take their orders, conscious of Clayton's watchful gaze. "What can I get you gentlemen?" she asked, keeping her tone pleasant but professional. The oldest of the 3, a man with a thick mustache and cold eyes, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well now, aren't you a pretty one? Whiskey all around, darlin', and keep it coming." "Yes, sir," she replied, turning quickly to fetch their drinks. When she returned with the bottle and glasses, the men had fallen silent, but she could feel their eyes on her as she set down their order. "Will there be anything else?" she asked, already backing away. Not just yet, the mustached man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But we'll be sure to let you know. Throughout the evening, Genevieve felt the newcomers watching her. Clayton lingered longer than usual, nursing his coffee and occasionally stepping outside, only to return a few minutes later. As the night wore on, the saloon grew rowdier, and she lost track of the strangers in the crowd. It was past midnight when she finished her shift. Mr. Rankin was counting the day's take, and the piano player was on his last song of the night. Genevieve untied her apron and hung it on a hook in the back room. "I'll be heading home now, Mr. Rankin," she called to her employer. The balding man grunted his acknowledgement without looking up from his money. She slipped out the back door into the alley behind the saloon. The night air was cool, a welcome relief from the heat and smoke inside. Her small room was just a short walk away, in a boarding house run by a stern but fair widow named Mrs. Fletcher. Genevieve had taken only a few steps when a shadow detached itself from the wall ahead of her. "Evening, miss," said the mustached man from earlier, his voice slurring slightly. Mighty dangerous for a lady to be walking alone at night. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stopped, calculating the distance back to the saloon door. "I'm just heading home, sir, if you'll excuse me." He moved to block her path. "Now, don't be in such a hurry. Me and my friends were hoping to get to know you better." As if on cue, his two companions emerged from the shadows behind him. "I really must be going," Genevieve said, her voice steadier than she felt. She turned to retreat to the saloon, only to find the way blocked by one of the other men. "You're coming with us, girl," the mustached man said, dropping all pretense of courtesy. "We got a buyer who pays top dollar for pretty things like you. Don't make this difficult." Fear shot through her like lightning. She'd heard stories of women disappearing from frontier towns, sold to mining camps or worse. She opened her mouth to scream, but a rough hand clamped over it before she could make a sound. "Now, that wouldn't be wise," whispered the man holding her. "Just come quiet and you won't get hurt." Genevieve bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth. The man cursed and released her, and she screamed as loud as she could. "Shut her up," the leader hissed, a fist connected with her stomach, driving the air from her lungs. As she doubled over gasping, she heard the distinctive click of a revolver being cocked. "I believe the lady isn't interested in your company, gentlemen." Clayton Xanders stood at the mouth of the alley, his pistol aimed steadily at the mustached man. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel beneath it. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the leader snarled. "Walk away while you still can." "I'm making it my business," Clayton replied. "The lady's going to walk over to me now, and you three are going to leave town, tonight." The three men exchanged glances, clearly calculating their odds. Genevieve saw the leader's hand twitch toward his holster. "I wouldn't," Clayton warned. "I've already got the drop on you, and I don't miss." For a tense moment, no one moved, then the leader slowly raised his hands. "Fine. Take the girl, but this ain't over." "For your sake, I hope it is," Clayton said. "Miss Vale, please come here." Genevieve didn't need to be told twice. She hurried to Clayton's side, her legs shaking so badly she feared they might give out. "Now back up, nice and slow," Clayton instructed the men, his gun never wavering. "Keep going all the way to your horses and ride out. If I see any of you in Sloan again, we won't be having a conversation." The men retreated, muttering threats and curses, but they went. Clayton kept his pistol trained on them until they disappeared around the corner. "Are you hurt?" he asked Genevieve, finally lowering his weapon. "Just shaken," she managed, wrapping her arms around herself. "They said they had a buyer for me." Clayton's jaw tightened. "Slavers. They've been moving through the territory recently. I've been tracking them for a while." He glanced down the alley where the men had disappeared. "They'll be back with friends. You won't be safe here tonight." "But where can I go?" Panic edged into her voice. "I don't have family and Mrs. Fletcher locks the doors at midnight." Clayton considered for a moment. "My ranch is a few miles outside of town. You'll be safe there tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out a more permanent solution." Under normal circumstances, Genevieve would never have considered going alone to a man's home, no matter how respectable he seemed. But these were hardly normal circumstances. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." He nodded and offered her his arm. "My horse is at the hitching post out front. Stay close." They made their way cautiously through the back streets to the main road, where a magnificent chestnut gelding waited patiently. Clayton helped Genevieve mount, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he said, and urged the horse into a trot. As they rode away from Sloan, Genevieve felt both terror and relief washing over her in waves. She'd narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, but she was now heading into the unknown with a man she barely knew. Yet somehow she trusted Clayton Xanders more than she'd trusted anyone in a very long time. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet. The rhythm of the horse's hooves and the solid presence of Clayton at her back gradually calmed her racing heart. For now, at least, she was safe. Clayton's ranch was modest but well kept. A small main house, a barn, and a bunkhouse where, he explained, his 2 ranch hands stayed. The hands were currently away, delivering horses to a buyer in Cheyenne, leaving the ranch quiet and empty. "You can have my room," Clayton said as he helped her down from the horse. "I'll sleep in the bunkhouse." "I couldn't possibly take your bed," Genevieve protested, though exhaustion was already pulling at her limbs. "I insist," he said firmly, leading his horse toward the barn. "Come inside when you're ready, doors unlocked." Genevieve waited on the porch, watching as Clayton tended to his horse. The house behind her was dark and silent, a shadow against the star-filled sky. Part of her still couldn't believe what had almost happened in that alley, while another part wasn't at all surprised. The world had never been particularly kind to women alone. Clayton emerged from the barn and joined her on the porch. "Let's get you settled," he said, opening the door and lighting a lamp just inside. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors that she assumed led to bedrooms. "It's not much," Clayton said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Genevieve replied sincerely. After boarding houses and rented rooms, the solid walls and quiet solitude of the ranch house felt like luxury. Clayton showed her to his room, which contained a bed, a chest of drawers, and little else. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up," he said, "and clean shirts in the drawer if you need something to sleep in." "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." "I don't know what would have happened if, don't think about it," he interrupted gently. "You're safe now." She nodded, suddenly overwhelmed with emotion. Clayton seemed to sense her distress. "Try to get some sleep," he said. "We'll figure things out in the morning." After he left, Genevieve washed her face and hands in the cool water, then changed into one of Clayton's shirts, which hung to her knees. She climbed into the bed, which smelled faintly of leather and pine. Clayton's scent, she realized. Despite everything that had happened, she felt strangely at peace, and sleep claimed her quickly. She woke to sunlight filtering through the curtains and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up abruptly. After dressing in her clothes from the night before, Genevieve made her way to the main room where she found Clayton at the stove, frying bacon. "Good morning," he said, glancing up at her. "Coffee's ready if you want some." "Thank you," she replied, pouring herself a cup. "I didn't expect you to cook," he shrugged. "Been on my own a long time, had to learn." They ate breakfast in companionable silence. Genevieve was surprised at how comfortable she felt in Clayton's presence, given that they had barely spoken before last night. "What happens now?" she finally asked, setting down her fork. Clayton leaned back in his chair, considering, "Those men will be looking for you. They're not the type to give up easily." "I can't hide here forever," she said, though part of her wished she could. The ranch already felt safer than anywhere she'd been in years. "No," Clayton agreed, "but until we know they're gone from the area, you need to stay somewhere safe." He paused. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Vale. It's unorthodox, but it might solve both our problems." Genevieve raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I need someone to help manage this place. Cook, keep books, that sort of thing. My hands are good men, but they're cowboys, not housekeepers. And with you here, those men would have no reason to suspect you're the same woman they were after in town." She stared at him, surprised. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes," he said simply. "Room, board, and fair wages, at least until those slavers are caught or move on." Genevieve considered the offer. It would mean leaving her position at the saloon, but Mr. Rankin could easily find another barmaid, and the thought of returning to Sloan, looking over her shoulder constantly, made her stomach knot with anxiety. "What would people think?" she asked. "A single woman living at a bachelor's ranch," Clayton smiled slightly. People will talk no matter what we do, but if it concerns you, my nearest neighbor is Mrs. Abernathy. She's a widow who runs her late husband's sheep farm with her sons. I could ask her to come by regularly, act as a sort of chaperone. The fact that he had already thought of this touched Genevieve. "You're very kind, Mr. Xanders." "Clayton, please," he said. "If you're going to be living here, we might as well use our Christian names," she nodded. "Genevieve." "Though most people call me Jenny." "Genevieve," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "It suits you." A warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun spread through her chest. "I accept your offer, Clayton," he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Good. I'll ride into town later to speak with Mr. Rankin and collect your things from Mrs. Fletcher's. You should stay here out of sight." "You don't have to do that," she protested. "I insist," he said, in that same firm tone he had used the night before. "Besides, I need to let the sheriff know about those men, though I doubt they've stuck around after being recognized." Genevieve spent the day exploring the ranch house, familiarizing herself with the kitchen and pantry. Clayton had been right about needing help. Everything was functional but barely so, with a layer of dust on most surfaces and a haphazard organization to the supplies. It felt good to have something to do with her hands while her mind processed all that had happened. When Clayton returned late in the afternoon, he had her carpet bag from the boarding house and a grim expression. "What's wrong?" she asked as he set her bag down. "The sheriff found one of those men from last night," he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Dead in an alley behind the Broken Spoke Saloon, shot in the back," Genevieve gasped. "Who would do such a thing, my guess?" "His own partners," Clayton said. "Maybe they argued over their failed attempt to take you, or maybe they thought he'd talk if caught. Either way, it's a message. They're serious and they're not leaving empty-handed." A chill ran down her spine. "Do you think they know where I am?" Clayton shook his head. "No, I was careful. Told Rankin and Mrs. Fletcher you'd found a position as a companion to an elderly lady in Cheyenne. Sheriff's the only one who knows the truth, and he's trustworthy." Genevieve nodded, relieved but still unsettled by the news. "I made dinner," she said, changing the subject. "Nothing fancy, just beans and biscuits." Clayton smiled, visibly relaxing. "Sounds perfect, I'm starved." Over dinner, they talked about the ranch. Clayton had inherited it from his uncle 3 years ago after spending most of his youth working as a cowhand on various cattle drives. He'd been slowly building it up, focusing on breeding quality horses rather than cattle. "Horses are smarter," he explained, "and there's always a market for good ones, especially with the Army." Genevieve told him about her life before Sloan, her parents in Missouri, her brother in Colorado, the series of jobs that had brought her west. It was strange how easy it was to talk to him, this man who had been a stranger just a day ago. As they washed the dishes together afterward, Clayton asked, "Do you play chess?" She glanced at him, surprised. "I do, actually. My father taught me." "Would you care for a game?" "It's how I usually spend my evenings when I'm alone." So they sat at the small table by the fireplace, the chessboard between them. Clayton was a thoughtful player, methodical in his moves, while Genevieve played with an intuitive style that clearly caught him off guard. When she checkmated him after a long, hard-fought game, he laughed in genuine delight. "Well played," he said, eyes twinkling. "It's been a long time since anyone beat me." "My father always said chess reveals character," Genevieve replied, enjoying his reaction. "How a person plays is how they approach life." "And what does my play say about me?" Clayton asked, curious. She considered him across the board. "That you're careful, patient, you think several moves ahead and don't take unnecessary risks." He nodded slowly. "And you, what does your play reveal?" "That I'm adaptable," she said after a moment. "I can change strategies when needed, and I'm not afraid to sacrifice a piece for a greater advantage." Clayton's eyes held hers across the table. Both useful traits in chess and in life. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Then Clayton cleared his throat and began resetting the board. "Another game?" he asked. Genevieve smiled. "I'd like that." The days fell into an easy routine. Genevieve cleaned and organized the house, cooked meals, and kept track of the ranch accounts. Clayton worked with the horses, repaired fences, and tended to the 100 other tasks a ranch required. His hands, Billy and Hank, returned from Cheyenne and accepted Genevieve's presence with little more than raised eyebrows. They were good men, Clayton had told her, loyal and hardworking if a bit rough around the edges. As promised, Mrs. Abernathy visited regularly, usually bearing freshly baked bread or preserves. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and capable hands. She clearly adored Clayton, whom she treated like a son, and she seemed to approve of Genevieve. "He needs a woman's touch around here," she told Genevieve during one visit, watching Clayton through the window as he broke a spirited colt. "Too much solitude isn't good for a man." Genevieve murmured a non-committal response, but she couldn't help glancing out at Clayton as well. The summer sun had bronzed his skin, and physical labor had honed his body to lean muscle. More than once, she had caught herself watching him work, admiring the fluid strength in his movements. It was foolish, she told herself firmly. He had offered her safety and employment, not courtship. The last thing she wanted was to complicate their arrangement with unwanted feelings. Yet in the evenings, as they sat playing chess or reading aloud to each other from Clayton's small collection of books, she found herself drawn to him in ways that went beyond gratitude. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and possessed a dry wit that often surprised a laugh out of her. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. A month passed with no sign of the slavers. The sheriff reported that they seemed to have left the area after their companion's death, though he warned they might return. Genevieve had almost begun to believe she was truly safe when everything changed. She was in the garden, harvesting tomatoes for dinner, when she heard horses approaching. Thinking it was Clayton returning from town, she straightened and shielded her eyes against the sun. What she saw made her blood freeze. 3 riders were approaching the ranch house, and one of them was the mustached man from the alley. They hadn't seen her yet, partially hidden as she was by the corn stalks. Genevieve dropped to the ground, her heart pounding. How had they found her? What should she do? Clayton and the Hands were all away from the ranch Clayton in town for supplies, Billy and Hank moving a herd to the north pasture. She crawled through the garden to the back of the house, keeping low. Once there, she slipped inside through the kitchen door and locked it behind her. She could hear the men dismounting out front, their voices carrying in the still afternoon air. "You sure this is the right place?" one of them asked. "Positive," replied a voice she recognized as the mustached man's. "Followed him from town last week. The girl's here somewhere." Genevieve's mind raced. The rifle Clayton kept a Winchester repeater over the fireplace. She moved silently through the house to the main room and retrieved it, checking that it was loaded just as Clayton had taught her during target practice. The front door rattled as someone tried the handle, then pounded on the wood. "Hello, anyone home?" called a deceptively friendly voice. Genevieve positioned herself to the side of the window where she could see out without being easily spotted. The 3 men were conferring on the porch. After a moment, 2 of them headed toward the barn while the mustached man continued to circle the house. She had to make a decision. She could try to hide and hope they gave up, but instinct told her they wouldn't leave without searching thoroughly. She could try to slip out and run for help, but the nearest neighbor was Mrs. Abernathy, over 2 miles away. Or she could stand her ground and fight. The choice was made for her when the kitchen door splintered open with a crash. Heavy footsteps moved through the house, and Genevieve raised the rifle, her hands steady despite her fear. When the mustached man stepped into the main room, he froze at the sight of her with the weapon. "Well now," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "There you are, darlin'. We've been looking all over for you." "Get out," Genevieve said, her voice low and even. "Get out now or I'll shoot," he laughed. "You won't shoot me, women don't have the stomach for it." He took a step toward her. Genevieve fired. The bullet struck the floor just in front of his feet, sending splinters flying. The man jumped back, his smile vanishing. "The next one goes through you," she warned. "I said get out." For a tense moment they stared at each other. Then the man's hand moved toward his pistol. Genevieve didn't hesitate. She fired again, this time hitting him in the shoulder. He howled in pain and staggered backward, blood blooming on his shirt. The sound of gunfire brought his companions running. Genevieve heard them shouting to each other as they approached the house. She had only a few moments to reposition herself. She moved quickly to the back of the room, where she would have a clear view of both the front and kitchen doors. The wounded man had fallen against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing. "She shot me," he yelled as his friends burst in through the kitchen. The bitch shot me. The other two men entered cautiously, guns drawn. They spotted Genevieve immediately, the rifle now trained on them. Drop your weapons, one of them commanded. You're outnumbered, girl. Maybe, Genevieve acknowledged, but I've got 6 more shots and I only need 3. She was bluffing. She wasn't at all confident she could hit both of them before they shot her, but she kept her voice steady. The standoff might have ended very differently if not for the sound of galloping hooves approaching fast. All eyes turned toward the window as Clayton rode into the yard at full speed, his pistol already drawn. The distraction was all Genevieve needed. She fired again, hitting the nearest man in the leg. He fell with a scream, his gun discharging harmlessly into the ceiling. The third man turned to run, but Clayton was already at the door, his pistol leveled. "Drop it," Clayton ordered, his voice like ice. The man hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun to the floor. Clayton kicked it away, then quickly checked the other 2 men for additional weapons. "You all right, Genevieve?" he asked, his eyes never leaving the intruders. "I'm fine," she replied, though her hands were beginning to shake now that the immediate danger was past. Clayton nodded. "Good shooting." There was genuine admiration in his voice. Within the hour, the sheriff had arrived with deputies to take the 3 men into custody. 2 of them would live to stand trial, but the mustached man, whose name turned out to be Luther Grimes, had bled out from his shoulder wound despite Genevieve's reluctant attempts to save him. "You did what you had to," the sheriff assured her as his deputies loaded the surviving men into a wagon. Grimes was wanted in 3 territories for kidnapping, rape, and murder. The world's a better place without him. After the sheriff left, Genevieve sat at the kitchen table staring at her hands. They were clean now, but she could still feel Luther Grimes's blood on them, still see the light fading from his eyes as he died on Clayton's floor. Clayton placed a cup of whiskey-laced tea in front of her. "Drink," he said gently. "It'll help with the shock." She took a sip, the fiery liquid burning its way down her throat. "I killed a man today," she said, her voice hollow. "You defended yourself," Clayton corrected, "and this ranch and probably saved other women from a terrible fate." He sat down across from her. "I'm proud of you, Genevieve. And grateful you weren't hurt." She looked up at him, seeing genuine concern in his blue eyes. "How did you know to come back?" "I didn't," he admitted. "I forgot the list of supplies Mrs. Abernathy asked me to pick up. Pure luck that I returned when I did." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Though I suspect you would have handled those 3 just fine on your own." Despite everything, Genevieve found herself smiling. "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to." Clayton's hand remained on hers, warm and reassuring. "When I rode in and saw their horses, I thought." His voice trailed off and he swallowed hard. "I thought I might be too late. The idea of them hurting you, taking you away." He shook his head, unable to continue. Something in his expression, in the fierce protectiveness of his tone, made Genevieve's heart race. Without thinking, she turned her hand over and laced her fingers with his. "I'm still here," she said softly. Clayton looked down at their joined hands, then back up to her face. "Genevieve," he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. "I know this isn't the right time. You've been through a terrible ordeal today, but I need to tell you." A knock at the door interrupted him. Clayton cursed under his breath and went to answer it, returning a moment later with Billy and Hank, who had heard the gunshots from the north pasture and come to investigate. The moment between them was lost as Clayton explained what had happened. The hands offered to help clean up the blood and repair the broken door, and soon the house was bustling with activity. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Genevieve found herself unable to sleep. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind, along with the unfinished conversation with Clayton. What had he been about to say? She slipped out of bed and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, stepping outside onto the porch. The night was clear and cool, the moon casting silver light over the ranch. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the clean air scented with pine and sage. The sound of the door opening made her turn. Clayton stood there in his shirt sleeves, his hair tousled as if he too had been unable to rest. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "No," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see his face." Clayton nodded in understanding. "It gets easier with time." "Not better necessarily, but easier," she glanced at him. "You've killed before." "Yes," he said simply. During the war and after, never by choice, always because there was no other way. They stood in silence for a while, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. "What were you going to say earlier?" Genevieve finally asked. Before Billy and Hank arrived, Clayton turned to face her, his expression serious. "I was going to say that I've grown very fond of you, Genevieve, more than fond. These past weeks, having you here, it's been." He searched for the right words. It's felt right, like something that was missing has been found. Genevieve's heart pounded as she met his gaze. "I've felt it too," she admitted softly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "Not now, not ever. I know it's too soon, and after today you might want to go somewhere new, start fresh. But I had to tell you how I feel." Genevieve leaned into his touch. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "This is the first place that's felt like home since my parents died." Clayton's eyes softened, and he leaned down, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. "May I?" he asked. In answer, Genevieve closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but it quickly deepened as months of unacknowledged attraction flared to life. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Clayton rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face as if she were something precious. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Genevieve Vale," he murmured. She smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the summer night. "I think I'm already there, Clayton Xanders." He kissed her again, and for a little while the horrors of the day receded, replaced by something beautiful and hopeful. The next morning they rode into town together to give their statements to the sheriff. The surviving slavers had talked, revealing details of a larger operation that crossed several territories. The sheriff promised that telegrams were already being sent to lawmen throughout the region, and that the men would face justice for their crimes. As they walked down the main street of Sloan afterward, Genevieve was conscious of the curious looks they received. Word of the shooting had spread quickly, and she could hear whispers following in their wake. "They're calling you a hero," Clayton said quietly, noticing her discomfort. "The sheriff told people how you stood your ground against 3 armed men." "I don't feel like a hero," she replied. "I was terrified." "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," Clayton said. "It's about acting despite it." They stopped at the general store to pick up the supplies Clayton had originally come for the day before. The owner, Mr. Peterson, refused to take their money. "Consider it my contribution to the woman who rid us of Luther Grimes," he insisted. "That man and his kind have been terrorizing settlements up and down the territory for too long." Outside, they encountered Mrs. Fletcher, Genevieve's former landlady. The older woman embraced her warmly. "My dear, I was so worried when Mr. Xanders came to collect your things," she said. "He told me you'd found a position in Cheyenne, but then I heard about what really happened." She lowered her voice. "Will you be returning to your room now that the danger has passed?" Genevieve glanced at Clayton, who was carefully arranging their packages in the wagon, giving them privacy. "No, Mrs. Fletcher," she said. "I believe my future lies elsewhere." The woman followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "I see. Well, he's a good man, Mr. Xanders. A bit solitary but good-hearted. You could do far worse." By the time they returned to the ranch that afternoon, Genevieve felt drained but resolute. The events of the past 2 days had clarified something for her life was too short and too uncertain to waste a moment of happiness. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to Clayton. "I've been thinking," she began. "A dangerous pastime," he teased gently. She smiled. "Perhaps, but necessary." She took a deep breath. "I want to stay here with you. Not just as your housekeeper or bookkeeper, but as more." Clayton's expression grew serious. "Are you sure, after everything that's happened?" "Because of everything that's happened," she corrected. "Life is fragile, Clayton. I don't want to waste it being cautious or proper at the expense of joy." He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "What exactly are you proposing, Miss Vale?" There was a hint of amusement in his voice, but his eyes were intent. Genevieve gathered her courage. "Marriage, Mr. Xanders. I'm proposing marriage." Clayton's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with delight. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the man supposed to do the proposing?" "I've never been one for convention," she replied, her heart racing. "Besides, you already told me you love me. I'm simply suggesting we do something about it." Clayton laughed, a full, joyous sound she'd rarely heard from him. Then he sobered, bringing her hand to his lips. Nothing would make me happier, Genevieve, but are you sure this is what you want? I'm just a rancher. I can offer you a comfortable life, but not luxury. I've never wanted luxury, she said truthfully. Just a home and someone to share it with, someone who sees me as I am and values me for it. Clayton stood, pulling her to her feet. Then, to her surprise, he knelt before her. In that case, he said, looking up at her with those clear blue eyes, Genevieve Vale, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Tears pricked at her eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. He rose and pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Sloan. Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on hosting a reception at her farm afterward, and it seemed half the county attended. Genevieve wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Fletcher had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women present dabbed at their eyes. And later, as they danced under the stars to music provided by the town's fiddler, Genevieve felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. What are you thinking? Clayton asked as he held her close during a slow waltz. That I'm waiting for something to go wrong, she admitted. I've never been this happy before. It doesn't seem real. He spun her gently, then pulled her back to him. It's real, he assured her. And if something does go wrong because life is unpredictable, especially out here, we'll face it together. She rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. Together, she repeated. I like the sound of that. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and joy. The ranch prospered under their combined care, with Genevieve's organizational skills complementing Clayton's knowledge of horses and land. They expanded the herd, built a larger barn, and added a room to the house. In the evenings, they still played chess, though now the games often ended in laughter and kisses rather than formal checkmates. They read to each other, talked for hours, and made love with a passion that only seemed to deepen with time. When winter came, bringing snow and long nights, they would lie tangled together under piles of quilts, planning for the spring and sharing dreams of the future. Clayton wanted to breed a line of horses renowned throughout the territory. Genevieve spoke of planting an orchard, of children playing beneath apple trees. The idea of children was no longer theoretical. By the time the snow melted, Genevieve was certain she was with child. She waited until she was sure before telling Clayton, watching his face transform with wonder and joy at the news. A baby, he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Clayton was protective to the point of being overbearing at times, insisting that Genevieve rest and hiring a girl from town to help with the household chores. Genevieve tolerated his concern with good humor, knowing it came from love. Their son was born on a crisp October evening with Mrs. Abernathy acting as midwife and Clayton pacing outside until the infant's first cry split the air. They named him Thomas, after Genevieve's brother, with James as a middle name to honor Clayton's father. Looking down at the tiny, perfect face of their child, Genevieve felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Clayton, sitting beside her on the bed with tears unashamedly tracking down his face, seemed similarly affected. He's beautiful, Clayton murmured, gently touching the wisp of dark hair on the baby's head. Perfect, just like his mother. Genevieve smiled tiredly. I think he has your eyes. Too soon to tell, Clayton replied, but I hope he has your spirit. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler to little boy, it became clear he had inherited traits from both parents. He had Clayton's thoughtful nature and Genevieve's quick mind, along with a curiosity that kept them both on their toes. The ranch grew along with their son. Clayton's breeding program gained recognition, with buyers coming from as far as California for his horses. Genevieve's orchard took root, and though it would be years before it yielded a significant harvest, the sight of the small trees growing straight and strong filled her with satisfaction. When Thomas was 4, a daughter joined their family. They named her Emma Louise, and from the moment she drew breath, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Where Thomas was reserved and watchful, Emma was bold and expressive with a laugh that could light up the darkest day. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts that threatened the ranch, harsh winters that claimed animals despite their best efforts, and the usual challenges of frontier life. But through it all, Clayton and Genevieve faced each obstacle together, their partnership only strengthening with each trial overcome. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, Genevieve would remember that night behind the Silver Spur Saloon when three men had tried to sell her like property, and a cowboy had stepped from the shadows to say she would walk free. "What are you thinking about?" Clayton would ask, noticing her distant expression. "How differently things might have turned out," she would reply. "If you hadn't been there that night, if you hadn't offered me sanctuary," and he would pull her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. "But I was, and I did, and here we are." His voice would grow teasing. "Besides, after seeing how you handled those men at the ranch, I'm convinced you would have found your way to freedom somehow, with or without my help." She would laugh and kiss him, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together, a life of love and partnership, of children and growth, of challenges met and overcome. It was a good life, she reflected, watching her family from the porch of their expanded ranch house 10 years after that fateful night. Clayton was teaching Thomas how to saddle one of the gentler mares, his instructions patient and clear. Emma was collecting eggs from the henhouse, singing to herself as she carefully placed each one in her basket. And soon, in just a few months, another child would join their family. The baby growing beneath Genevieve's heart was a surprise, but a welcome one. "Mama, look." Emma called, running toward her with the basket. 22 eggs today, that's the most ever." Genevieve smiled at her daughter's excitement. "Careful, sweetheart, don't trip." Clayton looked up from the horse and caught Genevieve's eye across the yard. Even after all these years, the love in his gaze could still make her heart skip. He said something to Thomas, then crossed to join her on the porch. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hand automatically going to the small swell of her belly. "Wonderful," she replied truthfully. "Though your son or daughter seems determined to practice riding skills already." Clayton laughed, the lines around his eyes crinkling. At 36, he was still as handsome as the day they met, though now his hair was starting to show strands of silver at the temples. "Takes after the Xanders side then, we're born in the saddle." "Heaven help me," Genevieve sighed dramatically. "Another horse-mad Xanders." Clayton drew her into his arms, careful of her condition. "You love it," he murmured against her hair. "I do," she admitted. "I love all of it. Every moment." That night, after the children were asleep, Clayton and Genevieve sat on the porch swing he had built when she was pregnant with Thomas. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant hills. "Remember our first kiss right here on this porch?" Clayton asked, his arm around her shoulders. She nodded. "The night after I shot Luther Grimes. Not the most romantic setting," he acknowledged with a wry smile, "but I couldn't wait another day to tell you how I felt." Genevieve leaned into him, remembering the mixture of terror and exhilaration she had felt that night. "I'm glad you didn't wait. We might have missed our chance." "I don't believe that," Clayton said, stroking her hair. "Some things are meant to be, Jenny. I think we would have found our way to each other no matter what." She smiled at the nickname he rarely used. "The stoic rancher turns out to be a romantic at heart." "Only with you," he replied, kissing her softly. "Always with you." As they sat together under the vast Wyoming sky, Genevieve thought of all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, the losses and gains, the fear and courage, the choices made and paths taken. And though she couldn't know what the future held, she was certain of one thing. Whatever came their way, they would face it together, just as they had for the past decade. From the unlikely beginning behind a saloon in Sloan, they had built something beautiful and enduring. A home. A family. A love that had only deepened with time and trials. And that, Genevieve reflected as Clayton's arms tightened around her, was worth every step of the journey.